welcome in. My name is Joey Browning, and you are watching or listening to the inaugural edition of Joey Browning's College Football Show. Whether you're watching us on a YouTube channel or you're listening in podcast form, we can't tell you how grateful we are that you're listening to our little show about the greatest sport in the world. Can't tell you how excited I am for this thing to get started, guys. This channel's been a long time coming. A little bit of background on myself. I am a high school football coach in the state of Georgia, and I'm a diehard college football fan. And it's really the mesh point of this show in its beginnings and kind of its inspiration, what its ambition is. I want this to be a place where we talk about all the goings on in college football um, from a very informed standpoint. No hot takes, no hyperbole, and the show that an informed college football fan would want to listen to and engage with. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is engage with more college football fans. And for myself to grow as a fan and to learn as much as I possibly can with you all. The other part of that is the coaching standpoint. In my coaching background, X's and O's are gigantic fascination for me. And I really want this show to be a place where people can come and learn as much about the game as they want to. And so we will have film breakdowns, and this will be a place where we look at the X's and O's very heavily. We talk about the X's and O's a good bit, but not enough or so much that it makes people feel that we're talking over their head when it comes to the game of college football. It's going to be a place where we do it in a very welcoming way. We do it in a way that everybody can learn something. And that's really the goal of the show. And so, like I said, I can't thank you enough for being here. It's been a long time coming. I've had conversations with people that I trust for a long time about the possibility of doing something like this. And, all it took to finally get going was to have a 2.5-week Christmas break out of school and, to get started on this. Not only did, start a YouTube channel, but in a podcast, but, also shave my beard and I'm rocking a mustache. So, you never know what can happen when you have a few days at home from work. The technical part of this, if for those of my friends out there in the high school football coaching world, so far has been a little bit like trying to get a huddle sideline to work for an entire high school football game. But as of right now, fingers crossed, we're sitting here and things are working, and hopefully you can hear me. And if you're watching YouTube, hopefully you can see me. So enough about me. We're going to get into really the meat and potatoes of our first show here, and we're sitting here on Sunday, December 28th. We're 3 days away from the Orange Bowl quarterfinal, and we're 4 days away from the other 3 college football playoff semifinals with the Fiesta Bowl. I'm sorry, with the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, and the Rose Bowl on Thursday. And so that's going to take up a good portion of our show tonight. But we're also going to talk about goings on of college football, like I mentioned, and that the very pressing thing from over the weekend is the hire of Kyle Whittingham at the University of Michigan. And so, first of all, looking at things in the University of Michigan, and obviously there's been a lot of talk about how this opening came to be. If you're a Michigan fan, not the greatest way for your head coaching job to come open. But I have to say that Michigan landed the plane. All right. If you were looking at how this coaching search was going to turn out, whether who was going to make the hire, was Ward Manuel the AD? Was he going to be allowed to make the hire after everything that's happened there in the last several years under his watch? This is probably the best outcome you could possibly hope for if you're a Michigan fan. Just looking at some of the things out there that the respected voices in college football are saying about this hire, you couldn't ask for anything better if you're Michigan, in my opinion. Top 5 coach in the sport, most people would agree. You look at the 177 wins he has since he took over in 2005 at Utah. Kyle Whittingham, is a true football guy. And I think if you're a football guy, you can see that. You can see that in the way that Utah plays the football game and the way that the program has been run in Salt Lake City since Whittingham took over. In the coaching circles, it's known that Urban Meyer, who was predecessor at Utah before Kyle Whittingham took over, is very close with Whittingham, and this is something that a lot of people, I don't think we really saw coming. But I think if you had to make an informed sort of hypothesis as how this thing came together, I would not be surprised if Urban Meyer, uh, you know, was very close in the ear of Kyle Whittingham, in his opinion about this job, about the Michigan job, about the Big Ten Conference, about the availability of players, to a place like Michigan. And I think that's probably got a big, you know, part, or plays a big part in this hire is somebody like Urban Meyer's role in being close to Kyle Whittingham. I don't think any true football guy has anything bad to say about this hire. If you look out there, um, Whittingham is somebody that, like I said, he's obviously won a lot of football games. He's won conference championships, and he has led a program at Utah uh, to a very consistent run over the 21 years that he was at the helm there. And I don't think, I think something that gets lost nowadays when big time jobs like a Michigan comes open is, and you looked at there were other openings like this year as well. LSU, Florida, Penn State. The first thing people want to do is throw around like, who's the big name, right? Who's the hot name? And we lose sight of the guys who just win, who are just program builders, who are just those football guys that know what they're doing when it comes to building a program, maintaining that program, keeping the thing in between the lines, and succeeding consistently. Not necessarily, being the flashiest, winning the press conference, but being a professional head football coach. And that is Kyle Whittingham, right? And so if the Kalen DeBoer fascination, obviously, that took up a lot of the air in the room early on with this Michigan search. Kalen DeBoer's a good football coach. He's a proven football coach. He's a career head football coach. Everywhere he's been, from Sioux Falls to Fresno State to Washington to Alabama, he has consistently won, and he knows how to build a program and he knows how to run it. Kyle Whittingham is no different. Okay, he brings experience. 177 wins over 21 years. That's experience. Discipline. If you watch Utah's teams play, they are so disciplined, and they play with a certain style of football that not everybody in major college football plays with, and that comes straight from the top down. It comes straight from their head coach. They play a very physical brand of football, and I don't think that Michigan and the people and the deciders there at Michigan, that's something that was not lost on them, is obviously the way that Utah played football. In organization, one thing that even the diehard college football fan probably couldn't tell you who's Kyle Whittingham's best coordinator, who's been his best OC, who's been his best DC. Who knows? He's been one of those head football coaches that no matter his assistants, no matter the people that are hired away from him, no matter the players that graduate and move on or go elsewhere, his results have been the same. They have not changed. And so it tells you right there, this is a guy that knows how to build a program. Some people, and I see it already kind of thrown around. The age. He's 66 years old. And, this is one of those things that in the circles of college football, when a big time job like this opens, you want to have that kind of bullet point, that bull's eye age hire. Like, you don't want somebody in their 60s, because how long is he going to be there? Because, people, when they imagine that hire, that prototypical dream hire for the program, they're thinking somebody like a Nick Saban or a Kirby Smart, right? Who's hired in the prime of their coaching career, in their 40s, maybe early 50s, and they have a good 20 years to lead that program to, 5 or 6 national championships. That's a dream world, right? Instead, people lose sight of these career head football coaches that are so good at building and running programs and knowing how to do the day to day and keep the thing on track. That we start looking for that hot name. And one of the things about the hot names, it's always going to be somebody that's an up and comer, right? Somebody that's the hot coordinator or the group of 5 coach or the coach that's, if you're hiring at a Big Ten school, maybe it's a guy that's in the Big 12 or in the ACC, right, as a head football coach. He's 66 years old. Guess what? Guess who's 64 years old? Kurt Cignetti. And they're probably all but about 3 major college football programs that would fire the guy they have right now to get Kurt Cignetti at 64 years old. So age, I'm not really worried about that with Kyle Whittingham. The guy's, obviously, if you watch him, if you see him on the sideline, if you see him in an interview, the guy's, he doesn't seem like he's 66 years old. I think he's got a lot of tread left on the tire. And obviously, he's very motivated. If you see or have kind of paid attention here, read between the lines a little bit about what happened at Utah, they went 10-2 this year. They were ranked 15th in the final college football playoff standings, and the guy basically got pushed out the door. It seemed like they really wanted to move on and make the succession from Whittingham to Morgan Scalley, the DC, who's also the coach in waiting. And they wanted that to happen sooner rather than later, even though the results on the field have not dropped off at all under Kyle Whittingham. He's just a couple years removed from winning back-to-back Pac-12 titles at Utah before they moved into the Big 12. And if you look at the teams they lost to this year, he lost to BYU in a game that they probably should have won. And against, honestly, BYU, they have a lot more resources than Utah has when it comes to NIL, when it comes to, building a staff and having that depth of staff there and the resources you need to win big-time college football. Another team lost to is Texas Tech, who obviously we know under, the boostership of Cody Campbell that Texas Tech is outspending everybody. And those are the teams they lost to this year. So it's not like they've fallen off at Utah. So I think he's very motivated to win. I think he's very motivated to go to take a job like Michigan and basically do what he did at Utah. Build a consistent winner that's going to be physical, that's going to do things disciplined, that's going to be organized. I think if you look at the way things kind of fell apart under Sharon Moore with, everything he got fired for calls notwithstanding, the program lacked a certain organization, a certain consistency, even though it had only been 2 years since he took the job. Kyle Whittingham is the opposite of that. He is going to bring in organization and discipline. That place is going to be running like a sewing machine, and they're going to be better for that. There's not going to be this up and down that we've seen there at Michigan, over the last couple of years. I don't believe. I could be dead wrong about that, but I believe Whittingham is the guy to go in there and get that thing done. And I think, this is a type of hire. Like I mentioned Kurt Cignetti before. Whittingham is kind of a type of hire in college football that I love to see, of hiring the guy who's that career head coach. The Kyle Whittinghams, the Kurt Cignettis, the Bob Chesneys is going to UCLA after he's been, at Holy Cross and he's been at James Madison. Guys like Willie Fritz, who, hey, by the way, just last night, Willie Fritz took a dumpster fire at Houston, and in 2 years he's won 10 games there in a power conference. Willie Fritz has won everywhere he's been. He's 65 years old. Given these career head coaches that obviously it's their profession to be a head football coach in college football, giving them a chance at these big jobs. I love this this trend that seems to be, kind of picking up steam. Hey, everybody loves the Lane Kiffins. Everybody loves the John Summeralls. But hiring these guys that, you know, that are not the big name, splashy press conference guys like Kyle Whittingham, that's what college football winners are built on and have been built on for a long time. And so I love that trend that we're seeing in college football of hiring these guys. Matt Campbell is somebody else just hired at Penn State. It took Penn State going all the way around the coaching carousel to finally land on the right guy for the job. I think Matt Campbell fits that mold as well, being that guy who's a career head football coach who just knows how to do it. Michigan needed to have a non-disastrous end to this search, and they passed that with flying colors with the hire of Whittingham. They can put all the Sharon Moore stuff behind them, and I think they're going to be in great shape going forward. Looking, from an X's and O standpoint, love the background offensively that Whittingham had at Utah. His teams are a perfect match for the identity that Michigan has had recently when they've been successful, since the return of Jim Harbaugh in 2015, up until, till now, till the present time. They're going to be heavy focus on gap scheme run game. If you watch them, Utah, counter, power, using big athletes like their tight ends and the running backs, getting them the ball in their hands and wildcat stuff. Just this year, Utah led the nation, yards per carry, 6.2 yards per carry, had the best rushing offense in the country when it came to yards per carry. I love their empty quarterback RPO stuff where it's just the quarterback in the backfield. They've got some type of gap scheme run called, but they have, quick game tag to it. That stuff is, I love watching teams that do that stuff. And they're going to have a physical edge about them. They're going to play with a chip on their shoulder. That is what Whittingham teams do, and that's what they're going to do at Michigan. And so, to me, at first this hire kind of seemed out of left field because I really didn't expect it to happen. But, the further we get away from it being announced, the more it just makes sense. And I think Michigan is much better off as a program than they were, 2 or 3 weeks ago in the direction they were headed with the hire of Kyle Whittingham. And so, very excited to see where Michigan goes in the future under the leadership of their new head coach. So, on that note, we will transition away from talking about the Michigan hire of Kyle Whittingham to previewing all 4 of the college football playoff quarterfinals. Obviously, this is a very exciting time for us as college football fans to finally get to the part of this playoff that really gets your blood boiling. Okay. And that is these games with these 8 teams, these 8 programs, these 8 brands. Guys, if you put these 8 teams and their helmets up on a screen somewhere, like this is a helmet part of the bracket right here, right? Gone are the James Madisons, the Tulanes, right? You have 8 sort of helmet identified brands of college football that are going to go at it and, play over the course of the next 3 weeks, and one of them is going to be a national champion. And I know that there's been much debate, very justly, about how the 12-team playoff was formed, how it got here. It's, it's different little quirks and how certain people get in and certain people get left out, and, how we have games on campus in the first round, but we don't have any games on campus after that. All that aside, you have exactly what you want as a college football fan this Wednesday and this Thursday with these 4 games. You could not ask for better. Only thing you'd ask for better if they were on campus, which they should be, and the bowls, not really sure the purpose they serve anymore. And once major college football figures that out, and the powers that be figured that out, guess what? We'll have games on campus going forward in the quarterfinals and maybe even the semifinals. But that aside, we're going to preview the games. We're going to try to do a great job here previewing these for you, giving you all the information that you would need to kind of go into these games with a full picture and a full perspective of what to expect. So we'll go chronologically, and we'll start with the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. Wednesday night, 7:30, ESPN. Ohio State is a 9.5-point favorite against the Miami Hurricanes. Miami coming off that win at Texas A&M in the first round. Guys, this is the biggest point spread of any of these quarterfinal games at 9.5. But I believe this game has the potential of being the most intriguing. And we're going to get into that. Okay. So, guys, everything that you look at says Ohio State in this game, right? And I think the casual college football fan would say, hey, Ohio State, who are they going to play in the Fiesta Bowl? Who are they going to play in the semis? You look at Ohio State has not given up more than 17 points all year. They're the first team since 1975 to give up 17 points or less in every regular season game that they've played. Ohio State is first in points per game allowed and passing yards allowed defensively. Their defense is an absolute tank, and they have been that way all year, no matter who they've played. However, peak Miami, the peak potential of this Miami team makes this the most interesting game to watch because of how they match up with Ohio State if Miami brings their A game on Wednesday night. If you look at Ohio State, we just mentioned, they have rolled this year. Both Texas and Indiana were noted for their pass rush going into those games, right? Texas is built up front. Indiana is built up front like no other team that Ohio State's played all year. They're not Northwestern, okay? They're not Illinois. They're not those teams in the Big Ten that Ohio State has made quick work of all year long. They can get after the quarterback, and they can stop the run. And those are things that Ohio State has not seen very much this year. And both those teams, guess what? Common denominator, Texas and Indiana both gave Ohio State fits when it came to pass rush, and when it came to their offensive efficiency, being able to roll like it has all year, particularly in the red zone. Ohio State struggled to score and punch it in against Texas and Indiana, and I think that lays out a perfect sort of scenario for Miami to be able to pull this off. Okay? Running the football. Let's talk about that really quick, right? I think as if you look at these college football quarterfinals, the closer we get to the end of this thing, there are three common factors. Can you run the football when you want to? Can you stop the run? And can you get after the other team's quarterback? Not can you sack him, not can you make him throw picks. Can you get after the other team's quarterback? Miami can do all those things. Okay? Miami can rush the passer, and they can rush it like nobody's business when they're at their A game. Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, you saw it in College Station last Saturday. They wreaked havoc all day long on Texas A&M. They got after the quarterback. They forced Marcel Reed to make many mistakes. And honestly, guys, Marcel Reed, I think he did, a pretty good job with his legs of escaping and avoiding that rush and making things happen, off script for Texas A&M, where that thing could have been worse, right? But I think, those guys kind of lead the charge over there. They can get after the quarterback. I think offensively, they can run the football, right? We saw that against Texas A&M, and I think there was a little bit of reluctance in that game at times for Miami to be consistent and commit itself all the way to the running game. And then you saw in the fourth quarter, the dam finally broke for Texas A&M, and that was the difference in the game. And I don't think this is a Carson Beck game. I think if you know what you've seen about Ohio State defensively, guys like Arvell Reese getting after the quarterback, Caleb Downs in the back end roaming around, I don't think this is a game that Miami wants, Carson Beck back there throwing it 30 or 40 times. I really don't. I think that spells a bad outcome and a bad result if Carson Beck is having to win this game throwing it 35 or 40 times, I think Miami's in trouble if that happens. However, I think if Miami's turning around and handing the football off, I think if they're getting the hands in the ball, or the ball in the hands of guys like Malachi Tony, right? That I thought Shannon Dawson, the OC at Miami, I thought he did a great job at Texas A&M, getting him the ball in jet sweeps, snapping it directly to him in Wildcat, even having him throw double passes and stuff, right? Getting the ball in that guy's hands because he's very, very good. And not necessarily traditional dropbacks, right? Where you're dropping back, you're putting pressure on your offensive line to protect, you're putting pressure on your quarterback to try to read out some progression and stand in there against the rush and make a good throw. Hey, you can just hand it to him. You can direct snap it to him. Get the ball in that guy's hands. Even though he's a wide receiver, he's a football player, right? And so getting the ball into his hands the most efficient ways that you can, I think that's great coaching by Shannon Dawson. I think you're going to see more of that in this game as well. Now, I think Miami loves to play one high defense. If you watch them, they love to create an 8-man front. So, what I mean by that is they're going to play one high. They're going to play 4 down linemen with 2 inside backers. They're going to play an outside linebacker, and they're going to take that safety. He's going to be their 8th guy. And they love to play that. Miami loves to play that type of defense. They lived in against Texas A&M, where when you play that type of look on defense, you're basically, you got safety in the middle of the field. Your corners are on an island. You're weak in the flats, okay, so the outside, the shallow area in the outside, and you're weak in the seams vertically, okay, between your free safety and your corners. That's the way Miami likes to play, and they do it very well. Like I said, those guys up front like Mesidor and Bain, they get after the quarterback. They don't have to really pressure a ton because they can get after it with those guys that are down linemen. But they put their corners on the island when they do that. They like to play a lot of cover 3, a lot of bump and run, where the corners are up at the line of scrimmage and they bail out. I do think that style of game could be trouble for Miami. Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate have time to get open, right? If Julian Sand has time to stand back there and let those routes develop by those guys against those one-on-ones, without safety help, I think Miami can be in trouble with that type of game. If you look at Ohio State, they love big dropbacks. This year, they've averaged 11.9 yards per completion, and they lead the country in completion percentage at 77%. So, guys, if you think about that, they're completing 77% of their passes offensively, but they're also averaging 12 yards per completion. So it's not like Sayan's just standing up and throwing 2 screens and 1 screens out to the perimeter, quick little bubbles and stuff like that. Free access hitches and slants. They're throwing the ball downfield, and this is a staple of Ryan Day's offense, and it has been for years. These big dropbacks, it's hard play action where quarterback's going to take a big 5 to 7 step drop. He's going to go through a full progression, and he's going to launch that thing, right? Where they run things like crossers, double post concepts with deep crossers under them. That's kind of the staple of Ryan Day's offense. And if you play the style of defense Miami does, if you don't pressure Julian Sayin, you're going to get lit up, okay? Especially with guys like Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, who I think they just have a factory up there at Ohio State of professional Sunday NFL wide receivers. I mean, they just keep cranking them out. It's kind of crazy how many of those guys and kind of the frequency of those type of dudes that they have on the outside where, man, it's just for a college football corner or safety to have to try to play against those dudes and cover them downfield. I mean, it's tough. And if you can protect long enough that they can get downfield, go back and watch that Oregon game last year in the Rose Bowl. I mean, they ate those dudes alive. And Oregon does not recruit. I mean, you look at Dan Lannon's, his recruiting philosophy and his NIL philosophy. They're not recruiting, 750-pound dudes out of high school to play DB. They're recruiting pros, and they absolutely ate them up running those deep drop back, hard play action things that Ohio State and Ryan Day loves to do. And Ryan Day's calling the plays in this game. Don't forget that, right? Brian Hartline, the OC and receiver coach, has accepted the job at South Florida. He's staying on and coaching the receivers, but Ryan Day's calling the plays. And so if you want to go back and kind of look at some of his history in these games since he's been there, that's the style of offense they like to play. Okay, so it's a big drop back. If Miami can't get pressure and Sayan has time for those things to develop, they're in trouble. Okay, I think the game could be as simple as that, right? If Miami cannot get to Sayan and not affect him, and he has time for those big crossers and those double post concepts to develop, I think Miami's in big trouble. Okay, I think if they can, though, in contrast to that, obviously, Captain Obvious here, Joey, if they can pressure the quarterback, then it'll be good for Miami. I think we'll have a game, okay? I think we have the potential for a really good football game in this Cotton Bowl if Miami can get after Sayan. Now, as if you look at Ohio State's run game, they average 162 yards a game, but they really struggled kind of going back to that Texas and Indiana pass rush we talked about against Ohio State. The ability to run the football against those same teams, right? Like they really struggled to run the football. If you look at those games against Indiana, 58 yards rushing on 26 attempts. That's 2.2 yards a rush. Against Texas, 77 yards on 34 attempts, 2.3 yards a carry. Miami is built similarly to those teams in the front seven. I would anticipate Ohio State's going to have trouble having a consistent run game. And so that puts even more on Sayan, on Carnell Tate, on Jeremiah Smith, on that offensive line to protect and those backs to stay in protection. That puts even more on that part of the game for Ohio State. So the potential for this to be the most interesting game of all four of these quarterfinals is there if Miami can bring their A game. And their A game is running the football. It's not dependent too much on Carson Beck slanging around. It's getting the ball in the hands of Malachi Toney. And then on defense, it's rushing the passer and getting after Julian Sayin and being able to play that one high 8-man front defense that Miami likes to play. And being able to consistently get stops against the run and try to get Ohio State off the field. I think that's what this game comes down to. The recipe's there for Miami to win, and they have the personnel to do it. Mario Cristobal, this has kind of been the team in the trenches that he's been building to since he got to Miami, and you can see it on both sides of the football, offensively and defensively up front. They're built the way that he wants his football teams to be built, where they're very big and they're very physical. They've got the personnel to do it. They got the recipe to do it. Do they have the championship DNA to do it? That's been the question about Miami all year. And I think in this game, that's why I'm probably more excited to watch this quarterfinal in the Cotton Bowl than I am any of these other games. And we have 4 great games. Don't get me wrong. There's 4 really good football games to look forward to. This is probably the one I'm most excited to watch just because of that. Okay? So, moving on, like I said, in chronological order, on Thursday, we'll get things kicked off on New Year's Day in the Orange Bowl. Not in Miami, up the road. I think it's not Coral Gables anymore. The old Orange Bowl was. But Miami Gardens. So kind of go up the Florida Turnpike there from Miami about 30 to 45 minutes depending on traffic from South Beach. Where you find Hard Rock Stadium, the home of the Orange Bowl, and where Oregon and Texas Tech, are going to duke it out for a shot at the college football playoff semifinal. So this is another game, y'all, that just fascinates me. The statistical breakdown of this game, dudes everywhere, right? You look at Oregon, Dan Lannon, since he's got there, I mean, there's a reason Dan Lannon has said you're going to have to pry him out of Oregon, uh, you know, with a crowbar if he's ever leaving there, because they have all the resources. That he knows how to go get these dudes. He has experience at places like Alabama and Georgia, and how to get these guys in, and how to build the program uh, with the the recruiting DNA that builds a foundation for national championships. And he knows what it looks like. He knows how to do it, and he's done it at Oregon. I mean, this team is. It doesn't look like an Oregon. The Oregon that played for the national championship in 2014 and 2010. I mean, we're far cry from that with the guys that Oregon has walking around up there now, playing football for them. They are a legitimate, um, you know, SEC Big Ten style, you know, top 4 or 5 program in the country team when it comes to their blue chip, ratio, and the guys that they have that are just could play anywhere in the country. Um, and the flip side of that, Texas Tech, the job that Texas Tech has done, getting these guys in and building this thing, through the portal. People want to look at it and say, well, they got a billionaire investor, and he said, there's no expense spared in terms of trying to get this program to compete for national championships. People like to point to that, but they don't like to give them credit for how they've done it. It'd be one thing to have the money to say, "Hey, go out and pay all these guys." But it's a whole other thing how they've been able to, from a personnel standpoint, identify the right guys, bring them in, um, coach them up, and develop them even further, and be able to do what they've done. I mean, Texas Tech, especially on the defensive side of the ball, they are just lights out. They suffocate teams. They dominate teams up front. And really, from aside from one afternoon in Tempe, Arizona, against Arizona State, in October, nobody has come close to Texas Tech, physically, that they've played. And so I think that's why this game really intrigues me, to see the Big 12, right? Playing the schedule in the Big 12 and doing what you've done. Now you're going to step and play that Oregon, who has that blue chip ratio, who has that championship DNA, who has a guy leading them that, we mentioned Signetti earlier, about people that push their guy out the door to get pretty much everybody in the country, except for, probably uh, 3 or 4, are getting rid of their guy for Dan Lannon. You get to see this matchup and see how well you match up against, you know, one of the best in the sport. And guys, if you look at these teams, they're built so similarly when it comes to their statistical profiles and their styles. I mean, you look at this year, Texas Tech's second in the country in offensive points per game, and they're fourth in the country in opponents' points per game. They give up 10.9 points per game. Oregon, similar, 15th in points per game offensively, and 15th in opponents' points per game. They give up about 16 points a game. Guys, in the way that these teams play defense specifically, uh, they don't allow teams to run the football, and and they are able to be physical on offense and run the football and impose their will and say, "Hey, we're running the ball. Hey, we're right here. We're about to run power. We're about to run, you know, zone. We're about to run right at you, right here. And there's nothing you can do. But we're going to physically impose our will." That's the way these teams are built. Um, and they're so similar. I think, like I said, if you look at their statistical profiles, Texas Tech has the best rushing offense in the nation when it comes to yards. I'm sorry, they had the best rushing defense in the nation offense. I know I mentioned earlier Utah had the best rushing offense in yards per carry. Texas Tech has the best rushing defense in the country. And once again, people, the naysayers are going back and say, "Hey, well, when you're playing, you know, uh, Iowa State, when you're playing Kansas and Kansas State, and you're playing Baylor, yeah, you're going to hold those teams down when it comes to rushing the football. That Utah team I mentioned, Texas Tech beat them, and they held them to 3 yards per carry. So that's the best rushing team in the country. They had the best rushing defense in the country, and they completely shut them down. Their only loss to Arizona State, obviously, back in October in Tempe, they were held well below their offensive, their average offensive number of snaps, right? 65 total offensive snaps. And one of the other big things in that football game, Texas Tech didn't force a turnover. Texas Tech leads the country with 31 turnovers by their defense this year. They had 0 turnovers forced against Arizona State, and they lost the football game. I don't think there's any coincidence about that. They are a very, very stingy, opportunistic defense. They want to take the football away. They want to get it back in their guys' hands. They want to run that thing. They want to control it. They want to run as many plays as they possibly can run offensively. They want to get you behind and get you chasing and let that front seven really eat. And that's really kind of their profile as a team. I think, Texas Tech has also held opponents to 185 passing yards a game in the Big 12. Once again, playing teams like Baylor and Houston, those teams throw it around. West Virginia, Texas Tech has just obliterated these teams to the point where, they get them having to chuck the football and they still can't do it. All these teams are playing from behind. I mean, they beat West Virginia 51-0, and these teams are still only averaging 185 yards passing the football. That tells you a lot about how good they are on defense, I believe. I think these teams are built so very similar lines of scrimmage. They're lines of scrimmage teams. I think it's a line of scrimmage game. Obviously, Captain Obvious again, Joey. Line of scrimmage game, and you're down at the top 8 in the college football playoff. It's kind of going to be what you expect. But this is truly going to be a line of scrimmage game between Texas Tech and Oregon. I think quarterback play is going to be the key. I think it's going to be who do you trust more when you expect who's going to win this football game. Oregon's favored by 1.5. Basically, it's a toss-up game. Dante Moore, Baron Morton. Which quarterback do you trust more? Which offensive skill group do you trust more? I think that's what this game comes down to. I think these teams are built so similarly. I think that production-wise, these two offenses are like the Spider-Man meme, right? They're just sitting there pointing to each other, identical to each other, and how they like to produce, and how they like to run the football and control the game, and how they like to hit explosives in the passing game. From an X's and O's standpoint, they do it very differently. Mac Leftwich, the OC, Texas Tech, is in his first year there. He came from Texas State. He was at Incarnate Word before that. He comes from the Brow School, the deep choice, right? And what I mean by that is they're not going to be very formational. They're not going to use a bunch of shifts and motions to get what they want. They're going to spread you out. They're going to look at leverage and grass, space. They're going to look at the numbers you give them. And if they give you light numbers in the box, they're going to attack the box with a run. If they widen you out the receivers and you give them one-on-one or you give them leverage on the perimeter, they're going to chuck the deep choice, which basically is a choice route by a receiver who says, hey, I'm either taking the top off and running a go if you try to play me up tight, or if you play off of me, I'm going to curl it up underneath and we're going to throw that all day. That's the Brow School. That's the deep choice. That's Mac Leftwich. That's what he comes from. And Texas Tech has been very good at that this year. If you look at Oregon, though, Will Stein, offensive coordinator there, is one of the best play callers, I think, in the country. They do things a little bit differently, even though production-wise, once again, they run the football and hit explosives about like Texas Tech does. They want to formation you. They want to shift you. They want to motion you to find leverage, to find grass, to find free access, to say, hey, we're going to RPO you. And, that's the way RPO works, right? If you have a run play called, but if you can get what's called an advantage on the perimeter to throw that quick game, to throw that fast screen, right, where you're going to get exactly what you want as long as you can catch the snap, throw the football, and catch it by the receiver, you're going to get exactly what you want in the RPO game, in the pass portion of that. That's what Will Stein does the best. Giving you funky formations, unbalanced receivers, and having receivers covered up by other receivers, and getting numbers to one side, and really just attacking the leverage and grass that you give. That's what Will Stein is good at, and that's what Oregon is good at. And so they really attack it in different ways offensively. I think the line on this game, we talked about earlier, which quarterback do you trust more? I think the line, Oregon slightly being favored. I think it tells you that Vegas kind of trusts Dante Moore a little bit more over Baron Morton. And so I think that's what they think will be the difference in the game. And I think that's going to be the deciding factor in this game. Minus turnovers is going to be which quarterback plays the best. And, I think that's going to determine a lot about this football game. So we're really looking forward to that one. Like I said, in Miami between Oregon and Texas Tech to kick things off on New Year's Day. Then we go out west, the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl, Pasadena, where you're going to get Indiana, the number 1 overall seed, against the plucky, up-and-coming underdog Alabama. So pinch yourself right now to understand that is the case. Indiana is the number 1 overall seed, 13-0, Big Ten champs, and a 7-point favorite against the Alabama Crimson Tide in the Rose Bowl in the College Football Playoffs quarterfinal. Just one of those things, man. Another instance of this being the greatest sport in the world. That this is the case. If knowing what you know about Alabama, knowing what you know about Indiana football, the losingest program in major college football history, is setting in this situation. Guys, looking at these teams, I think this is really the first game that I myself, of these we've looked at so far, kind of come to and say, what gives here? If you look at the statistical comparison, if you look at sort of the characteristics of each of these teams, what has to happen for Alabama to win? I feel like that kind of is my take on this going into this game. I feel like Miami is the biggest underdog spread-wise, but as mentioned earlier, I think the path is very obvious for what Miami can do to win that football game. I don't know that that's so much the case for Alabama. I think you look at Indiana and how dominant they've been. I think you look at how well coached they are. I think you look at what they do scouting-wise and how they take away the best things that other teams do week after week after week. And you look at the inconsistencies of Alabama this year, and you look at the things that Alabama just has not done well all year long. 14 games in now, it kind of starts to add up into a scenario where Alabama's going to have to play lights out over their head to win this game against Indiana. So, like I said, looking at the statistical kind of comparisons and profiles of these teams, Indiana has 10.8 points per game, second in the country. They are a dominant defense, only giving up 257 yards a game, and they love to run the football offensively. They average 221 yards rushing. I think that's you look at a lot of these stats, that's the biggest gap between Alabama and Oklahoma. I'm sorry, Alabama and Indiana. We played Oklahoma last week. Alabama and Indiana is the ability to rush football. Alabama runs for 109 yards per game, and as we've seen, that has been a huge issue for them, especially in the second half of the season where they just cannot generate any consistent run game, and it puts so much on Ty Simpson and the Alabama offense to try to throw it around and strictly win one-dimensionally in a way that is just not sustainable in games like this against opponents like this. Indiana's efficiency is obviously, you have Fernando Mendoza, Heisman Trophy winner. 33 touchdowns, 6 picks, and they lead the nation in third down conversion rate. And they're so balanced offensively. Like I said, they run it for 221 yards a game. They're very physical. And so I think if you look at that makes it very tough for anybody to get ready for this Indiana offense. Those receivers, guys. Indiana has some guys on the perimeter that can go. They have some long, lanky dudes. 6'3", 6'4". If Alabama's going to force them into one-on-ones out there and try to stop the run and try to get pressure on Mendoza, um, in a scenario that creates one-on-ones on the outside, that ain't a great place to be for anybody. Okay, the Indiana don't go into this thinking that Indiana is this, uh, you know, they're this plucky team that has taken these guys that are under recruited or can't play and turn them into a great team. They've done a great job of developing these dudes, but they got some dudes, right? Um, you know, Chasserot being one of those. Like they can go, and Mendoza he can distribute the football. He's very good at that, and I think that once again we're kind of adding up all these factors that go against Alabama in this matchup. And it really is kind of shocking to see Indiana and Alabama and it being so one sided on that side. Keys for the defense. Indiana, like I mentioned, they're fourth nationally in yards per game, giving up rushing the football. They only give up 77 yards rushing a game. I don't think that bodes well for Alabama. That once again we mentioned they have not been good at running the football. I think you look at the way Indiana pressures. They get after the quarterback. Go look at that Big Ten championship game. Julian Sayin had not been pressured like that all year long, and Indiana straight got after him. They forced things to get off script. They forced him to get off of his first read. They forced him to go away from Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate a lot, and they held Ohio State to 10 points because of that. And so I think in this game, and Alabama being so one-dimensional, Ty Simpson, he's a really good quarterback, man, when he's clean. And I think he's a really good quarterback even when he's not. If he has answers, if he knows where to go to with the football, if he knows where his hots are, if he knows kind of those checks to the defense. I mean, if you look at the first Georgia game, the one in Athens in September, they won that football game because Ty Simpson knew where to go with the football, even though Georgia was trying to bring pressure. I still think that it's not a great recipe for Alabama against this Indiana front as they try to get after him and they don't have a run game to protect him. I do think that you look at all the stuff, all the metrics favor Indiana, all the analytics favor Indiana, spread favors Indiana. And as a college football fan, if I'm an Indiana fan, I hate that. I hate that there's so much solidarity. Everybody, ever since the Big Ten championship game, has been saying, "Hey, whoever gets into that game, Oklahoma or Alabama, they're going to get, boat raced by Indiana in the Rose Bowl." And then now, for 2 weeks after, you're getting the same thing. Or 2 weeks after the Alabama is, beat Oklahoma and they're the team going, you've still gotten nobody talking anything good about Alabama. That is the last thing I would want if I'm Indiana, because you just know that spot in college football is not where you want to be, where you're favorite, but you're not like a double-digit favorite. Everybody is on your side. Everybody's tooting your horn. Everybody is saying that there's no way you can lose, that there's no way that this plucky little underdog can beat you or compete with you. And that is, that's a scary place as a college football fan. And so Alabama is game. They're 100% capable of winning this football game. They have dudes. Okay, Alabama still has dudes. They might be an underdog in the Rose Bowl to Indiana, but they got guys. They can get after it on defense. They can stop the run. They can rush the passer. They have guys in the secondary that can cover and run and hit and make plays. And they got guys on all. I mean, Jeremy Bernard, Ryan Williams, uh, you know, uh, Brooks, Horton, all those guys, they can play. And if Indiana, which they're not going to be, but if Indiana comes into this game at all thinking that, you know, it's already been decided, Alabama is going to put it on. Okay, which, like I said, they want Kurt Signetti. He is going to have his team ready. He's going to be a stickler for perfection in everything that they do in their preparation. They'll be ready. And I'm excited to watch this game because I want to see what Alabama does in this spot. You know, this is the biggest underdog they have been in a game. You know, the most heavily favored the opponent has been in a game against Alabama since 2008. Um, and I'm just excited to see what they do in the spot. I'm excited for Indiana. I mean, this is their moment. This is their chance uh, against the big dog in the sport to, you know, not announce their rival because we all know they're there, but to say we really are going for it all. We are wanting to win a national championship. We are going to win a national championship, and we're going to beat the program in college football on our way to it. And so I think that's, you know, to me that's very uh, intriguing to watch. I think it's exciting for college football fans to watch because it's not the same old Alabama rolling in to play a Big Ten team in the playoffs and you know, you know, beat them by 2 touchdowns. This is not that, right? This is something completely different, and I think it's something new with a team like an Indiana hasn't been there and is fresh blood to come in and give, you know, people something else to see. I think that's an exciting thing. But I'm also excited to see how Alabama responds in this spot. So, um, you know, is there anything there to suggest Alabama's going to run the football effectively? Because if there's not, I don't think it bodes well at all. Um, I think strength of schedule is something if you look at going into this game. Alabama is sitting there, you know, depending on if you look at Sagarin or ESPN, FBI, you know, I think Alabama's anywhere in top 5, top 6 in the nation when it comes to the strength of schedule. Indiana, anywhere from, you know, 30 to mid 40s. And so, what bearing, if any, does strength of schedule have on this game? Is Alabama this battle tested team that's going to come into the playoff and do work? Or does Indiana just play the teams that are on their schedule and they're going to do the same thing to Alabama they've done to, you know, the majority of their schedule? You know, we will see. I do think against their 4 toughest opponents, we talked about Indiana, they love being balanced, they love running the football, 221 yards a game. Oregon, Iowa, Penn State, Ohio State. Those are their 4th most difficult opponents that they've seen this year. They averaged 3, 2.7, 3.5, and 3.5 yards per carry against those teams in those 4 games. And they really struggled to run the football. Ohio State is the only team of those 4 that they broke 100 rushing yards against. And that is going to be something that is going to be a very telling sign. Can they add their name to that list and hold Indiana down in that 2 to 3 yards per carry range and really force Mendoza and those receivers to carry the load? I think that's something that will be very telling in this game if Alabama is able to do that. Um, Alabama has the program DNA to win this football game. There's no doubt in my mind. Kellen DeBoer is the coach. Alabama's a program. These players they have, uh, you know, not just their high school recruits, but the guys that are transfers. Alabama has the team to win this football game. Don't go into this game thinking that this is some uh, massive spread of a game. Like Alabama has exactly what it takes to win this football game. They just have to execute. And once again, that's one of the reasons I'm excited to watch, because they're not in the spot very much, and they get a chance to go in and be the underdog and say, "Hey, the world's against us. Nobody thinks we can do it." And I'm excited to see what they can do with that background going into this game. All right, and that brings us to the nightcap of New Year's Day of these college football playoff quarterfinals. Rematch between Georgia Bulldogs and Ole Miss Rebels in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl on New Year's night. Um, a place that Georgia is familiar with, not just geographically, but also um, philosophically in the college football playoff. Georgia is used to being here. And you look at the complete opposite of that in Ole Miss, right? Um, their first venture in the college football playoff, whether it's the 14 or 12-team version. And this is Ole Miss's opportunity to show the world that not only do they belong, but they are more than Lane Kiffin. There is life after Lane Kiffin for this Ole Miss football team in 2025 into early 2026, and that they are a contender for the national championship, and that they can beat a Georgia, a blue blood, a team that everybody knows is a legit national title contender. That they can pull this upset, they can win this football game, and they can move on in the college football playoff. It, like I said, two very different spots or two very different places for these programs, obviously coming in. I think if you look at Ole Miss and how they handled that first round game against Tulane after all the Lane Kiffin fiasco in late November, uh, about as best as you could possibly do it. I mean, it was a carbon copy of the first game against Tulane, which they won 45-10, and the second one they won 41-10. I didn't think it looked like their operation and their organization, uh, from a game day standpoint on the field, didn't look like it missed a beat at all without Kiffin there. Um, and so I think you got to give Pete Golden a lot of credit for that and his coaches. Uh, they definitely did a good job preparing that team for that game and got them up for it. And I think, you know, this is going to be obviously a different spot for Tulane, but I'm very interested to see that dynamic of not just without Lane Kiffin, but with this offensive coaching staff, where so many of them have one foot out the door with their jobs at LSU, still coaching Ole Miss in this playoff run. I want to see, when it comes to playing this championship DNA team like Georgia, how does that affect things, right? You can say all you want, hey, these coaches came back, they decided to stick with us through, to the end, and coaches, but in the backs of your mind, those players, they know that these coaches essentially chose another program over Ole Miss. They chose to go coach other players over them. And when push comes to shove, when adversity hits, how is that going to affect this Ole Miss team, right? Because it's one thing to say, hey, for a coach to tell his players to go out there and play hard. It's a whole other thing for those players to know that, hey, that coach is telling me this and that and trying to motivate me. He's leaving here as soon as we're done. And I'm not his primary concern. I think that's something in this game that um haven't seen talked about a whole lot to this point. And I'm really interested to see Georgia gets up in this game. Well, just by 7, 10, 14, whatever. What does that Ole Miss sideline do with that dynamic introduced to this whole thing? Like I said, not just the Lane Kiffin, but that those assistants that are coaching in this game. Looking at the statistical breakdown of this game, guys, obviously we know these two teams played in October in Athens in an absolutely awesome football game. One of the best of the year in terms of its viewability and its entertainment value. This was an awesome football game. 43-35, Georgia won. But looking at their statistical profiles, both these teams, I think they they do what they have to do on offense to be successful. What I mean by that is, if you look at Georgia, has Georgia only averaged 5.7 offensive yards per play, but game to game, Georgia does what it needs to do as a team to win. I think Georgia can beat you in so many ways offensively, whether it's RPO, quarterback run game, whether it's quick game, whether it's um, their boots and nakeds, their quarterback movement passes. I think Georgia can beat you in a lot of different ways. And I think they can do it going to a lot of different guys, whether it's their backs, their tight ends, their running back, or their receivers. Um, I think Ole Miss they do what they need to do to win in a similar way, um, but more based in this RPO world and this drop back world. That Lane Kiffin has sort of kind of meshed this offense between the Browse deep choice tempo philosophy and more of this RPO uh, background that he also developed as a coach before coming to Ole Miss. And I think that's sort of the engine that drives this thing is Ole Miss's ability to be in the right play with an RPO, regardless of what you do defensively. Okay. Um, Guys, obviously the biggest discrepancy between these two teams is the defensive metrics and the defensive numbers, right? Um, Ole Miss gives up, you know, especially on rushing defense, they're 66 nationally against the run. And we saw it in the first game. Georgia ran at will for over 200 yards in this game. Um, and it really set everything else up. And Georgia stops the run, right? That's what they do. I mean, you look at the SEC championship, the last game they played, they held Alabama to -3 yards rushing. Um, and even in this first game against Ole Miss, like they didn't just allow Ole Miss to run the football all over the place. Ole Miss, if you look at it, I mean, they didn't average very much rushing in that game per carry. And they really kind of lived and died off the arm of Trinidad Chambliss and off the legs of Trinidad Chambliss as well. Um, and that's kind of been how they went all year as an offense. I think Ole Miss had a great game plan against Georgia the first time around. And really, if you go back and watch the film, which we're like I said, we're going to watch some film of these teams and previews, all these quarterfinals, not just the Sugar Bowl. But if you go back and look at Ole Miss's ability to take advantage of Georgia's zone defense in that game. Georgia does a good job of mixing its man and zone looks, but anytime they were in zone, I mean, Ole Miss was ready to take advantage with an RPO where we have a run called, but we also have quick game called in the passing game. And if they're playing zone, we're going to attack the eyes of those linebackers, those guys whose job it is to come downhill and stop the run. And then we're going to pop the RPO, in behind their leverage or outside of their leverage against zone, right? Whereas if you run that stuff against man, it's not as good because literally that receiver is going to have a man responsible for him. Whereas in zone, he's just finding the soft spot in the zone, and you're relying on those defenders playing the run, and then you're going to pull the football and you're going to dump it to that open guy in that open zone, right? I think Ole Miss did a great job of scheming that stuff open. I think they manipulated Georgia's run fits. If you go back and look at the very first play of the game, Ole Miss gets Georgia in this uh, one high look where the outside linebacker for Georgia into the boundary was, uh, you know, he was basically the force player, meaning he has the force to run back inside. They run a counter scheme into the boundary where that guy's got to take it on. He's got to force the run to go back inside, and when he did, they took the second puller, who was a tight end sniffer, and ran him into the flat where there's nobody out there. And they got those inside linebackers flying downhill, and I think that's just one example of how they manipulated Georgia's run fits by playing with their eyes and telling them, "Hey, here comes this counter run play," but instead we're running a guy into the flat, and we've manipulated your eyes to enough to where we've opened up all that grass for that guy to run wide open to. I think they did a lot of stuff like that. I think they took advantage of free access throws. What I mean by that is when a receiver is lined up and there's no defender directly pressing him, Ole Miss just took advantage of that the whole game. The long touchdown in the beginning of the third quarter that Ole Miss had to number one to Stripling, the corners backed off, and they just throw a hitch to him. And I know that seems simple, but Ole Miss does that stuff so well, and they attack that leverage and that open grass, that free access so well. And eventually, what Georgia had to do was just, they had to commit to playing man and take away that free access and get right up in their face and say, hey, if you're going to beat us, you're going to throw it over our head, or you're going to back shoulder us away from our man coverage. We're not going to give you these RPOs. We're not going to give you these easy, quick throws where you can get the ball out of your hand immediately. We're going to make you beat our direct leverage of putting a guy right in front of you, a collision defender right in front of you. And that's eventually what won them the game. So Georgia's gotten better at that as the year has gone on. And I'm very interested to see how that's going to play out into this game. If Georgia can build on what they've done these last 6 or 7 games, and take that into the Sugar Bowl against Ole Miss, I think it bodes very well for Georgia to be able to be much more efficient and effective in stopping Ole Miss in this football game. I think Trinidad Chambliss was very good in that first game, getting the ball out of his hand, like I said, and taking advantage of what Georgia gave him, especially those zone looks. And I think that defensively, I think Ole Miss, if you look at their philosophy and what they try to do, they really want to be a lot like Georgia defensively, and that they want to be able to show these exotic, mugged up looks where it's simulated pressure, where we got 7 guys at the line of scrimmage that all look like they're rushing. Probably not going to rush all of them. Some of them are going to drop. That's the type of game they want to play, and they want to play man and different types of zone combinations behind it. But them being vulnerable to the run, them being 66th in the nation against the run, it makes them vulnerable when they try to do that stuff, right? Because they're not as gap sound when they try to do those simulated pressures, those mugged up looks. And so that's going to be something that in this game, can Ole Miss get Georgia off schedule? Can they stop the run enough? Can they affect Gunnar Stockton enough to get Georgia in 3rd and long, 3rd and 7 plus, where they can give those mugged up looks, those simulated pressures, those exotic looks? That's going to be key to this game, because if you go back and look at the first matchup, it was a clinic for the Georgia offense in terms of how to formation, how to shift, how to motion. Because when you do all that stuff, when you line up in 2x2, 2 receivers squeezed in a formation, and all of a sudden you bust out and you put a tight end's hand in the dirt, and you put 3 receivers on the other side, where you basically have trips on one side and a tight end closed to the other. That stuff forces a defense to be vanilla and be basic, because you can only line up so many ways to that stuff and be sound. If Georgia can stay in that stuff, if they can, and those are more run looks, they're more RPO looks. If Georgia can stay in those looks, Ole Miss is going to have a tough time stopping them again. But if they can affect Georgia on early downs and make them say, hey, you're not going to be in that. We want you to get in your basic looks of drop back pass, that Gunnar Stockton's going to take the snap. He's going to have to drop back. He's going to have to go through a progression. He's going to have to throw the ball downfield to move it and get first downs. That's what Ole Miss wants Georgia to live in. And if they can stop the run effectively and get some negatives on early downs, that's going to allow them to be more exotic and to be more complex looking on defense. And that's not what Georgia wants to be offensively. Georgia wants to be offensively very multiple. They want to formation you. They want to line up in stuff that gives them advantages in terms of being able to run the football and RPO off of it. And, I think that's going to be very key in this game. I think, once again, Georgia has to be able to play a lot of man coverage to take away the RPO game. They've done a lot of it here lately. If you look at the SEC championship, they manned Alabama up. Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton, all those guys that Alabama's torched them the first game in Athens. They manned them up and they dared them, and Alabama could not move the football. They've gotten much better at their man coverage, and I think that's going to be a big part of this game as well. I think they got to take away because the free access advantage RPO throws, the free access throws that Ole Miss had in the first game, that was a big part of their success. I think if Georgia takes that stuff away with man and says, "Hey, we're gonna get right up in your face. We're gonna play one high, KJ Bolden back there in the middle of the field, roaming around, and we're gonna dare you to beat us over the top and throw us back shoulder all the way down the field." If Georgia can consistently stay in that stuff, I think it could be a long night for Ole Miss. I think Bolden needs to be the eraser back there. Guys like Dalen Everett, Ellis Robinson, Melo Jones, they need to have big games in being able to cover those Ole Miss receivers 1-on-1. I think Keywan Lacey his availability in this game is gonna be huge. I mean, the guy has 21 rushing touchdowns. And I think there's a big drop off behind him in the running back room for Ole Miss. And there's a big drop off in production running wise. I think Chambliss is a big part of the running game, but if he's got to shoulder the whole load in this game, that puts a lot of pressure on him, right? And so I think his availability, is that shoulder good enough to go? Is it good enough to go, but he's going to be limited? I think that plays into this, his availability in general. I think that's a huge part of this game. Georgia's had 3 weeks to plan for this game. I think offensively, they gave Ole Miss fits that first time around with their formations, with their motions, with their shifts. With who you're going to worry about. Is it going to be quarterback run? Is it going to be RPOs? The tight ends had a huge game the first game. Noah Thomas, is Colby Young going to play in this game? Those big, long, lanky X and Z receivers of Georgia, are they going to be part of what Ole Miss has to worry about? I think all that stuff forces Ole Miss to have to be more vanilla and more basic. And so I think Georgia, those 3 weeks they've had to prepare, you have to think they were preparing for Ole Miss this whole time. That's going to be very key in this football game. And so I'm very interested to see kind of how those matchups play out. And so, guys, like I mentioned earlier, we will do film breakdowns all 4 of these quarterfinal games in terms of what to expect, what kinds of schemes are these teams running, what do they do well, what hurts them, what do other teams do well against them, and then kind of ultimately how that stuff's going to affect the outcomes of these games. So be looking for those here on our YouTube channel to be out within the next couple of days. That'll be our first foray into doing those film breakdowns. So I'm really excited about doing that part of this thing. And once again, guys, just very excited in general to be engaged in this conversation with my fellow college football fans out there. It's very exciting. If you could do us a favor, once again, subscribe to our channel. Follow us on any platform where you get your podcast, whether it's Apple, Spotify, whatever it may be. Email us. Follow our Twitter account. Follow our TikTok. We'll have links to those in the description of our YouTube channel. Give us an email, joeybrowningcfb@gmail.com. We're going to take constant questions and feedback from our listeners and from our viewers here. We'll have mailbag episodes. We really want this to be a two-way street in terms of the conversation, not just me talking to you guys, but you guys giving it back and talking back to me and kind of bouncing our ideas. And we want to do things on the show that you want to see. And so don't hesitate to hit us up with those things. And like I said, all those links to our other platforms, our social media, and our podcast will be in the show description. So, guys, with that, we'll sign off for the first episode of Joey Brown's College Football Show, and can't wait to see you again. Thanks, guys.